Okay, so welcome everyone to our second meeting of our Introduction to Networks Instructor Training class. Couple things I want to do is I did send out a video that explains assignments. And I know there's been a lot of questions about how packet tracers work and how the labs are. I had some folks this last time turn in a lab, and I'm going to actually go into the lab here in a minute. But this second lab here, or the very first lab, which is 292, which is the first one that's an actual configuration lab. You know, our first lab was just filling out, researching job opportunities and those types of things. Which, by the way, that is very interesting to look at in your area, and it was fun for me to look at the differences in the areas. You know, because even moving 30, 40 miles one way or another can show some pretty drastic differences in the types of jobs that are needed in certain areas. I mean, like right now, I know I've got 4 different open positions that someone's looking for requisitions in the Raleigh area, in fact, Cisco, that are cloud-based entry-level positions for people. You know, and that's just something around here we don't have, but that's interesting. But this next lab here that we're going to be talking about today and spending our time on, because I'm going to spend a lot of time discussing actually configuring devices today. This is done in NetLabs, and so you'll notice I've got a lab that is the lab 292, and my video will show you how the reservation takes place and all that. So I put that up at the very top. So if you get a chance, this assignments explanation is a 13-minute. That's right here is a 13-minute. Go ahead. Questions? But here's a 13-minute explanation on how and the assignments are, what I want you to upload with the packet tracers, what I need you to do with the labs and those types of things. I've also placed in here again, and I know I went over this last week, but I actually made a little video that explains how to use and get into Safari Online. So make sure you're making uses of that. It's funny, we had another school once. We have a part-time instructor who is click wrong thing there. Part-time instructor who works for another community college, and he saw the O'Reilly database, and one of the first things that happened is his college librarian is contacting our saying, how do we get this? So this is again a video just talking about actually taking you to the site. Let me go get my other video. I'll put that out there too, but I'll put that out there after a while. So, but don't forget this under Explore shared playlist. You've got all these materials that are available to you. I'd love to see every one of you get your CCNA because that's, again, I'm big on if you're teaching it, you need to have the certification. So before we go any further, any questions on anything up to this point? And again, be aware I'll explain a lot in the assignments, and I don't mind answering questions on that now. So if you have questions, even if you haven't watched the video, that's fine. Just let them go.
Nothing here.
Remember, again, due dates are not set in stone. So if you miss a due date, don't have a heart attack. Just be aware that they're there to kind of keep you on track and try our best to keep us on track. So I want to talk about basic device configuration. In fact, I'm going to pull this over here and throw it over on the side, and I'm going to grab my NetLabs over here. And I'm going to go into my NetLabs, and this is one of the most important things I can tell you about NetLabs is whenever you're doing the actual labs in NetLabs, make absolutely sure you use this document right here because it has been updated for use on NetLabs. So this is especially true on the lab in Module 4 because there's a section on wireless on the lab in Module 4 that simply doesn't exist in the NetLab. So if you do the Module 4 lab in NetLabs, you must use the documents from inside of here. So make sure when you're doing it, just save this to your machine and use this as your document. What this entire lab is about, though, is a basic configuration on a switch. So I'm going to jump in here real quick. And one of the neat things about this, I do want to explain a little bit. There's some confusion about how you access a device. Now, I don't have, unfortunately, I wish I had a router or switch here at the house. I don't have any at the house at the moment. But one of the things you will find on all Cisco routers and switches is if you look on the router itself, and you will see that on the back of all the routers, there is a console port. So here's a console port for a router. Let me pull the switch out here and flip it around. This thing, I can't remember how to flip the thing around. I can't remember how to flip it around. Well, it's on the back side of this one. Now, it's funny because what I tell people is when you look at it, and they're not showing it here, but it's a little, almost where you can see it, but the console cables and the color around the console is always ugly Carolina blue. I'm sorry if any of you are Carolina fans. I went to NC State, so I'm not allowed to like anything that's even Carolina blue except for the sky. But most new routers have an RJ45 console connection and a typical micro USB. I think it's not a mini, it's a micro. So it's the old standard USB connector. Now you can only use one or the other, so you can't be connected via the USB and the console and access both. But out in the real world, what we're going to do is we're going to have a PC or a laptop or something. And on that PC, we're going to have a cable. And they even make it the Carolina blue because that's what the color all the cables are. But it's what's called a rollover cable. So pins 1 through 8 are rolled. So the whole, whatever you are on one side, you flip the RJ45 in completely 180 and it rolls over the cable. But then we're going to connect it to the RS-232 port. Now this port on a typical desktop machine would have been our old DB9 serial connector. Many of them do not have DB9s anymore. And for that reason, we use USB to serial connectors. But we do RS-232, and then we are connecting. And when we say console, okay, when we do that, we're literally just saying that we're taking and plugging a cable into this console port. Now, it was interesting because as we look here, as we look on our NetLabs, when I click on this device, I'm obviously not connecting any cables in here, but back in my data center, there is actually a cable connected to the console port of this switch. And that cable is a rollover cable, and it is using what is called reverse Telnet. We've got a special access server installed that's something you have to install for NetLabs to work correctly. And so I am literally connected right now to the physical console port on switch 1 in this pod 12. So I can actually walk you into my data center and I can show you the 2 routers and the 2 switches that are associated with pod 12. And you know, these again are just real physical devices that we have access to. Now, when we go to configure a Cisco router or switch, we're working on the Cisco IOS, again, Internet Working Operating System. And we talked a little bit about the 2 different modes or 2 different main modes that we have in the iOS. And it was anybody remember it was user exec mode? And what was the other mode?
Privilege.
Privilege exec, okay. And remember we talked about how user exec mode is a look and see mode. And there's not a great deal of commands you can do inside of user exec mode. When you connect to a device and you put the console port in and you hit enter, you're automatically sitting at user exec mode. Again, delineated by seeing the alligator mouth, okay? Privilege exec mode. To get to privilege exec mode, we use the command enable. And boom, now we're in privilege exec mode, delineated by seeing our hashtag. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to walk through a basic switch config and explain it as I'm doing it. So at this point, I can't do any configuration commands. So if I try the command to set my host name is host name, and I can put S1. I will warn you if you're doing the packet tracers and it asks you to set the host name to capital S1 and you set it to lowercase s1, it may not give you credit for that. It may not give you points. I do discuss in detail in that little 13-minute video how to see what you have configured correctly and incorrectly in a packet tracer, because many of the configuration packet tracers actually show you, score you as you're putting items in. But hostname S1, you'll notice it says invalid out input. And it will even, here's one of the key things. You'll notice the caret right here. This tells you where you went wrong. So there's some command that begins with an H here, but it's not hostname. And so if I just put an H question mark, it will tell me all the commands that begin with H that are at this mode. Now, I know I've got to go into global config, and in this case, I'm going to do configure and terminal. And now I can shorten that to config T, but configure terminal, which means configure this device from the terminal or from this out of band management console. Now, if I put in host name, okay, so I do host name, and I am a slow typer now because of my one-handed typing this. Host name S1, you'll see it immediately takes place. Now, this is also a very, very important feature. If you've ever worked on Palo Alto firewalls or some other devices that are similar to this, as I'm putting these commands in, the difference between what happens in a Cisco device and like a Palo Alto firewall is this. As I'm putting the commands in, those commands are immediately being placed into the running configuration file. So if I do right now, and by the way, I'm going to show you a trick. If I try to type show running config, running dash config here, I'm going to get an error message because typically that command will not work inside of configuration mode. So I'd have to hit Control Z, drop all the way out, and do a show running config. Okay, and then it would show me the running config. And you'll see here, notice how the host name is set to S1. All right. Well, if I do a show startup config, you'll notice that the host name is still set to the default. So as I'm making changes to this device, as I'm doing this, all of my changes are being made to the running configuration file. All right. So here's a little trick I want to show you. Instead of having to jump all the way back and to run the show commands, you can use a command called do, and then type show running config. And basically do lets you run commands that typically don't run in configuration mode from inside of configuration mode. If you learn to use that command, it will save you an enormous amount of time as you're working inside of devices. So I've set my running config name. Now what happens is if the power goes off or if this device is rebooted, the configuration would be lost. So there's a command that you have to run to save the running config to the startup config. Does anybody remember what that is?
Copy run start.
Copy run start is one way to write it. So now I always teach people there's a book world, there's an exam world, and there's a real world. Okay. In the exam world, the correct answer to this command is copy running config. Okay, to startup dash config. That's the correct answer. Okay, and you know, of course, if I shorten it and show it to you in a shortened form, that's fine. But that's the correct answer on the exam always. You also can do, this is funny, you can actually do cop RS, and that is the shortest that you can do. That is not well, that is unambiguous. So I can actually type do cop RS, and it says destination file name startup config, and that does a copy run start. Now again, this copy command doesn't typically run inside of configuration mode, so by doing the do in front of it, I was able to run that command without having to drop all the way out of config mode and then come all the way back, again saving huge amounts of time. The last one I'm going to teach you is the real world thing that we all use, and that's just WR. Okay, WR is short for write memory or write to memory. So we could just do WR, and it will do the same thing. It copies the running config to startup config without asking you the name you want to use. It just uses startup dash config as the destination name. They've said for years they're getting rid of this. They'll never get rid of the write command because all of the engineers and everybody uses it because it's the shortest way to do it. Now let me show you this though. Now that I've saved my running config to my startup config, if I do a do show run start, you'll now notice that the host name is indeed set to S1. So I've copied that configuration from the running config to the startup config, and it would survive a reboot. So basically, as I'm doing my configuration, all the changes are happening in the running config that is in RAM. If I want to save those configuration changes, then you have to copy them from the running config to the startup config. So our basic config, we're going to want to put in some type of host name, which we've done. And then we want to set our passwords. And one of our main passwords is we don't want people to be able to walk up and plug into our device and get access to user exec mode. We don't want them to have that. So we're going to set a password on that console port. So we're going to do line console 0. And by the way, there's only one console port, so there'll never be, well, I've never seen anything but one. So line con 0 should always be the correct command. Now, real world, we're always going to put in this command, logging synchronous. And the reason being, this command keeps messages that come onto your screen here, onto the console screen, from interrupting what you're typing. So as you're typing things, if a message comes on with logging synchronous, it drops you down immediately and you don't lose your spot where you're typing. So trust me, just put that in there. It's something that you want to use. And we put in the command password, and we set our password. And we can use let me in, which is in one of the things, but we're just going to use Cisco. Now, never use Cisco in the real world. You should be using something that is obviously meets your local security policy, whatever it happens to be. And then you have to put in the command login to actually enable logins on the console. Once this happens, if I hit Control Z and I exit out of here, okay, watch what happens now. Now suddenly I'm actually going to be prompted for a password before I can even get to user exec mode. So I put in that Cisco, and you'll notice I'm now inside of the switch, which has been renamed S1, and I had to put in a password to get into user exec mode. Now that's all fine and dandy, but I also have to have some other passwords set. So I need to set a password for the in-band management. You're going to learn, and we won't do it right now, this is step 6, but we're going to learn how to do SSH configuration. And one of the things you'll learn about the CCNA is you will see that as one of the exam objectives, you must be able to configure SSH on Cisco devices. So we're going to have labs on it, and you're going to learn how to do it. But we need to be able to set a password on the VTY line for in-band management. So on a switch, we'll go to line VTY 0 to 15. So there's 16 lines by default on a switch. On a router, there's only 5 lines, 0 to 4 by default. So that's where if you see the command on a router say line VTY 0 to 4, that is why, because by default there's only 4 lines. At this point, we just put in password, and I'm going to use the same one, Cisco, because I'm lazy, and because that's what we do a lot in the curriculum, and then login. So now if I was to telnet from a PC over to this switch, I would be prompted for a password. So I can't get in via in-band management without at least some password in order to get the privilege, user exec mode. The next item is what some of you had trouble with in some of the labs. There's 2 different ways to set a privilege mode password. One of them is with the enable command. So I'm going to type this in and show you why we never use this. So enable, and let's just say I'm going to make it KFC. Okay. Enable password. Okay. Now, if I do a do show run, you're going to see why we never want to use this command. Look at what it does. It saves the password in clear text inside of the running config, or if you save it to the startup config, it saves it as clear text. So we never want to use this command. It's legacy. It's just really should have never even been. I wish they wouldn't even teach people about it, but I think they do just to ensure that you don't accidentally use it. The correct command is enable secret, and then you put in whatever you want your password to be. So let's say class. Now, by the way, I'm using the up arrow to show the previous commands, but do show run. You'll notice now that the enable secret, the password is encrypted with level 5 encryption, which is a pretty high level encryption that's used by Cisco. So, and by the way, you can't set the enable secret and the enable password to the same. It won't even let you do that. So on a couple of the packet tracers, some of you missed points because I think you put in the enable password instead of the enable secret password. But here's the cool thing. Once I've set this, if I do Control Z, I type exit. I am now prompted for a password to get into user exec mode, and I will also be prompted for a password before I can get into privilege exec mode. So we've set up our basic passwords to control access to a switch. These are the exact same basic passwords that we will use anytime you set up a Cisco router. It's the same. You'll set up your console V2I and your privilege mode passwords. Any questions on those?
We don't have to do the enable at all, enable password at all, just do the enable secret.
Correct. In fact, most people don't, just all they use is the enable secret command. They don't even use the enable password at all.
Wasn't there also an enable service password encryption command that would?
Yes. Yep. And it's actually here. I can hear config T. The command is, it's a global service password encryption, which I still do suggest you use service password encryption. Okay. This command, let me go back and I'll actually show you again. Do show run. You'll see that my passwords down here for my V2I lines and my console lines are in clear text. If we do the service password encryption command, password tag encryption. Now if we do a do show run, you'll notice that even our enable password is encrypted with level 7. But let me show you a nasty little secret here. Cisco level 7 decrypt. Okay, so let's go in here. It's see, I may not be able to copy this out of here. Let's try it though. That's how easy it is to unencrypt that. So even though it is encrypted by the service password encryption, the only thing this is really doing is keeping somebody from shoulder surfing. If someone gets a hold of your configuration files, that type 7 encryption will again last about 2 seconds, well, less than 2 seconds. So it's good to do it. It's still a best practice to always do service password encryption, but it's, you know, just be aware that it's not extremely secure. Right now it's off by default, and then we turned it on. So, but I'll add that. I actually will put that in here. I won't really make it. I just put service password encryption. Yep.
So both the enable secret and the password or service password encryption are a level 7?
No, the enable secret is a level 5.
Okay, and that's more secure?
Much more secure, yeah.
Okay.
There is, to my knowledge, no level 5 decryptor out there. So this right here, if you try to decrypt it, I'm sure it can be, I mean, everything can be broken, you know that.
Yeah.
But there's no easy way to break it. So you can't just go out and show a level 5 decryptor that I'm aware of. I don't think. We'll go look, but I don't know of one that's, oh, they do have one. Well, let's try it. Let's try this. I'm game for it. See if we can't break this thing. Yeah, it'll break it. It'll eventually break it, but I bet it will. It's trying.
So it'll just take a long time if it's
Yeah.
a really complex
Right.
one.
If you don't use class or something crazy, something easy, you know, don't use stupid simple password. That's the moral of the story. I like that. Yeah. As long as you've got a fairly complex password that you put in there, it's not going to be easy for it to be broken. Now, can it be broken? Of course, but it's going to take a lot of work on somebody's part. And we don't teach it in this class, but there's all kinds of ways to actually use different databases for your ability to log in and everything. You can actually make people have a AAA database and go to a TACA server or a Radius server and authenticate against an Active Directory. That's just beyond the scope of the CCNA. Okay. So at this point, we've done everything down to our SVI. Now, one of the weird things about a switch is a switch really has no port on it designed to have an IP address put on that port. When you think about a switch and you look at the ports on it, they're all designed to have host devices or end devices connected into them. So if we're going to manage a switch, we've got to have a way to put an IP address on the switch. Now, let you in on a little secret. If the switch supports it, like FA01 here, I'm going to go in here. If it supports the no switch port command, you can actually put in the command no switch port, and it will turn itself off as far as being a switch port, and you can make it into a routed port. The 2960s don't really support that, but on some of the higher end switches, you can actually, like a layer 3 switch, you can turn a port into a routed port instead of a switched port. These switches don't support it. So what they support is the ability to put a switched virtual interface. So if I do a do show IP, oops, get back in here, int brief. So do show IP interface brief. You'll see all of our different ports here. You'll notice that by default, we have one switch virtual interface, which is VLAN 1. And we're going to teach you for right now to put your SBI on VLAN 1. So you're going to put your IP address on VLAN 1. In the real world, we will never do that, okay? Because we do not want VLAN 1 to be our management VLAN. And that is because you'll learn more about VLANs later, but you'll notice that all ports by default are in VLAN 1. So if you make that your management VLAN, someone can just plug into any port and suddenly they're on your management VLAN. So we don't use that in the real world. Now, to learn what we're doing here, we do actually just use interface VLAN 1. And we can put an IP address on here. So IP address, I'm going to use 192.168.12.2. 255.255.255.0. Okay. I'm going to shoot a no shut command. Hey, Tom, so I'm going to ask you, if you will, to turn your video off just so it won't use up part of our screen space. Thank you, Thomas. Now, once I've got this, if I do a do, let's do the do show IP int brief again, you'll now see that VLAN 1 has an IP address on it and it's up. So I can go over to PCA and let's go over here and open our network settings. Let's take our Ethernet, change adapter options, properties. And as I know this is the screen's a little weird here. Let me. I'm going to give this PC the IP address of 192.168.12.10. And we're not going to put default gateway in this moment because we have no routers on this network anyway. And so close all that out, open up command prompt, do a quick IP config to make sure my IP address took, always a good thing. And it did. And now let's see if we can ping that switch. So let's do a ping 192.168.12. What I use? 3, 2, 2. I think I used 2. Go check. Yep, 12.2. 12.2. Yep, 12.2. Because I put in 192.168.12.2 as my SPI. And so now I can ping from this PC over to the switch. And in fact, if I wanted to manage this PC remotely, I can actually go in now and take PuTTY, and I can telnet to 192.168.12.2. And you'll notice I get a prompted for a password. This would be my VTY line password. And now I am in band managing that switch. So the SPI allows me to set an IP address that we can get to the switch via the network. Okay. Now, the only reason this all works is because all the ports, as I showed you earlier, all the ports are in VLAN 1. And so the PC is on a port that can connect to VLAN 1. I put them in the same IP address range or the same network. And so I have the ability to ping and telnet from the PC over to the switch. Last but not least, we do need to do a couple of little things. In the grand scheme of things, we will eventually have a router connected into this, and we'll need for our switches to get outside of our network. So there is a command default -gateway. If I can get, actually, I think it's IP default -gateway. Yep, IP default -gateway.192.168.12.1. And I'm just assuming that's going to be the gateway, okay? Because that would be the address. I would put the first IP address on this network on the router, okay? I'm not even sure they may have showed you that in the curriculum, but I show it to you just so you'll be prepared when you see it down the road. The other thing they do show you is called a banner message of the day. This one gets people sometimes because banner message of the day, and then you got to pick up a delimiter or delineating character. So in this case, I'm going to use a hashtag. Now you have to be careful because as you put this message in, if you put any hashtag in, that will end the message immediately. So if I'm typing here, and I'm going to do just a real quick ASCII type thing, but if I accidentally put in a hashtag, that will end my banner message of the day. So if I accidentally put a hashtag here, watch what happens. Boom, it's done. Now my banner message of the day is just 2 sets of stars. So I'm going to go back and do this again and change my banner message of the day to be something a little more interesting. Okay. Now let me ask you this. Where should your banner message of the day come from? How should you get a banner message of the day?
A legal document of some sort?
Exactly. You better get your lawyers involved for your organization. You should have it verified by your legal team and make sure it matches what is required in your jurisdiction, because you never want it to say welcome. You never want to say anything that could possibly get a hacker off for breaking into your system. There have been cases where somebody say, well, Your Honor, they basically invited my client in. Look, it says welcome. So just be careful with that. So now I'm going to type exit, and I'm actually going to drop all the way out and watch what happens now. You shall not pass. So our banner message of the day is showing up. We have our console password before we can get into user exec mode. We have a enable secret set. By the way, I'm using class because that's what I set for enable secret to protect being able to go into the privilege exec mode. And we have an IP address set on the switch so that we can connect to it remotely from other devices. You'll see here, even though I'm connected remotely, I still have to put in my enable secret password to be able to do this. Now, once all this configuration's done, the one thing I've got to make sure I remember to do is I got to make sure I remember to write it or save it, copy, run, start, so that we don't have a terrible situation, which has happened to me before, which has been you do all this configuration work on a device, you get interrupted, you leave that device. 3 months later, the power goes off and the device reboots, and all that work you did is gone because you forgot to do a copy, run, start. I used to be really mean in the classroom, especially with instructor trainer classes when we used to teach them in person. When we were doing hands-on testing at the end of each class, people would say, well, I'm ready for you to test mine or check it. I would say, are you sure? And they'd say, yeah, I'm sure. And then I would reach over and pull the power cables on their devices. And you would see, just for some of them, the look of horror on their face when they realized they had forgotten to save their configs. But that's something to be aware of, because it's not unique just to Cisco devices, but it's a big gotcha in the world of Cisco if you're not careful. And that, folks, is the entire basic configuration that they talk about in Chapter 2. As they get into passwords and all of this. I got tickled. I don't remember exactly who it was, but somebody instead of using password, put in PASSWD, and then tried to put in the password in NetLabs, which should have worked, quite honestly. So now what I'm going to do, I'm pretty much, are there anything else you want to see inside of NetLabs here as I'm inside? And I will show you a quick thing you can actually do, like if you do a show run or a show start, either one, you can copy and paste configurations in and out of here. So you can actually go up and copy the config out. You also can do copy selected text. So just go in here, and if I wanted to save this config for some reason, I could grab it all the way down to here. And I should have got the end, but it'll be okay. I did copy selected text, and then you could, it's in your clipboard now, so you could use it for what, if you wanted for some reason to have it outside of NetLabs. So that's pretty cool. You can do password recovery inside of NetLabs. So if you need to, you can actually do a password recovery. If you mess up your enable secret password, you can do that. It will do that. Take the password off for you. You can undock these, make them bigger, although they're pretty good now the way they actually, but you can undock it if you need to, if you have multiple screens, so you can pull these around different places. So it's possible to do that. Oops, clicked the wrong thing. Okay. All right, no questions. Well, one thing I ask you to do is when you notice I got 2 hours and 4 minutes left on this reservation. If I'm done with the reservation, I ask that you do end the reservation now. And that way this pod will be cleaned up. Everything that I just did will be removed and it will be ready for the next classmate to use. One of the cool things I can show you here just a little bit is I have the ability to go and look at usage in labs. And so I can actually look at the class and see every single command that's typed, which is really neat. So I can go in here and look at, if I do submit here, eventually I will see my reservation. It takes a little bit to get on there. So here's here. So I can click here and it'll actually show, here's every command that I typed during my reservation. If I want to look at session logs, I can look at everything I typed on S1. So I can look in here and say, this is literally as the switch booted up, and this is everything that I typed in during what we were doing here. Okay, which is pretty cool. It's neat because I can look at things, especially when we get to our hands-on final. It allows me to look and see everything that you've done, so that we can, if I do have a question about things, I can find them or I can show it to you. So, but real gear available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Kelly?
Yes, sir.
So you just freed up some time, and will that time go back on the board for us to grab another? Well, I guess what I'm asking is, can we do some stuff real time Like if there's an opening and I'm up in the middle of the night,
Oh, yeah.
can I grab the opening instantly?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. If you're inside of NetLabs, all you have to do is, if you're inside of here, and you're up and you want to do a lab, just go new lab reservation, schedule a lab for myself. You know, you'll only be in one class, so you won't have to look at 75 classes, but you'll be in this ITN Fall 2020 class. Click right here on the first item. This is your skills assessment. We'll do at the end, but this is the list of labs. So let's say you want to do lab 3710, just click here. And anytime the red line is our current time right now. So you just, and don't forget, there are a bunch of pods over here too. So there's plenty of pods available. But you'll notice, yeah, see my reservation just ended, so now this is available. So, you know, I can't guarantee you that you could jump in here and a slot would be available, but with 11 pods, typically there are slots available that you can find pretty easily. I will warn you, give yourself, when you actually do a reservation, it takes about 10 minutes for the pods to boot. So give yourself, you know, if you think it's going to take you an hour to do the lab, give yourself an hour and a half or so. I really probably wouldn't schedule any lab for less than 2 hours, just because of the fact that if you get done early, you can always end the reservation. I do have a cool thing set up too, though. As you get toward the end of your reservation and you see that you're not going to have enough time, I've allowed up to 2 extensions of 15 minutes each. So there is a way to tack on an extra 30 minutes if no one has scheduled anything right after you. But yeah, definitely, if you've got time, you can just go in here anytime and grab it and use it.
And if we start something and we run out of time, will we be able to pick up where we left off, or we start over when we find another reservation?
Unless you save the config files out, you typically have to start over.
Okay.
So, and you can save the configuration files, and you can actually save the configuration files locally. I didn't show you that feature in here, but there is a way to actually inside of the lab, as long as you're using Cisco as your console password and class as enable secret, to save the files out, and then you could just dump them back in.
Okay.
I tell people the safest thing is save them to a text file, and then you can put them back in there once you go back in.
All right.
Any other questions on the labs there? Okay. Time 4:19. We'll have a whole lot of time to work on chapter 3, but I do want to show you one thing here. I want to show you one other item that I haven't mentioned a great deal of. I do mention it in the assignments lecture I just put up for you. But down here at the bottom, you will see that we do have module group exams. It used to be that there was an exam for every chapter. Back when the previous version 6, there was a chapter 1 exam, chapter 2 exam, etc. Because the modules are smaller than chapters, they now have combined the exams into multiple modules. So once you get finished reading all of chapter 1 through 3, and you turn in the chapter 3 items that are due, or excuse me, module 3 items that are due this weekend, you will see on the listing that on September 27th, I have due this module exam. So it is turned on for you. So you'll be able to click it, and you will have an item that says take assessment. Okay, I don't have it here, but you would see a take assessment item, and it will launch it for you. These, I've got them set to where you can take them up to 10 times each. Yeah, I don't have to re-enable another attempt. It allows you to really use this more for study than really for an assessment type thing. Okay. So nobody's done any of these yet because we have not had. And I do mention one thing you'll notice a little different when you go to class now. When you actually click on our class and go in, I changed it from the one view to where it automatically goes into the modules view. So you don't have to click on modules to get into your modules anymore. I think that was causing a little bit of confusion also. So.
Will it keep the last score or the best score? If we take it after we say get it perfect, can we continue to practice?
It's the last score, so it only keeps your last score. So I wish it kept the highest, but it doesn't. It only keeps the last one. So, okay. Any other questions? Well, folks, that's really all I was planning to do today. I wanted to make sure you understood configuration of a basic device. And then we will move forward from there. So let me stop my share. Any questions about the class, about what we're doing? Any questions about the O'Reilly stuff?
Oh, I did have a question in regards. I think I mentioned I did the CCNA V6. Do we do like spanning tree protocol or like VLANs in this, or is that a few classes down the road?
That's the next class. That's switching routing and wireless essentials.
Okay. I did notice they're a lot lighter on packet tracers than they used to be.
Yeah, and spanning tree is covered in a lot less. Well, I'll say this: spanning tree is covered in more detail than it was in some versions of the curriculum, but in less detail than others. So it's kind of a medium delve into spanning tree, but that's in the next course.
Okay.
So, other questions? I'm gonna stop the recording then.